Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords. And today I wanted to show you something. Now that I finally got my print copy of Wilderlands, I wanted you to notice. Okay, so I don't know if you can see what I'm doing there with my finger. Right? This is The Invisible College, the biggest book I've ever published. Wilderlands is the smallest. And I've got the Old School Companion 2 here, and the two of them together don't even get to about halfway the size of The Invisible College. But I just thought it was very funny. To contrast the size of it, I think you could. So this is about 20 pages, which means you could fit. What is it? The Invisible College is 430 pages, so that would be like, what is it? 23 and a half copies of Wilderlands altogether, or something like that, before you'd be as thick as the Invisible College. Anyways, today I'm going to talk to you. Sometimes I get news that I think is worthwhile, but then there's like other stuff and I deprioritize it. And also sometimes I get news I'm like, well, that's interesting, but I'm not sure how much relevance it has until some other news story comes up and makes it worthwhile to make it interesting. And today this is kind of like that. It's kind of, it was at first it was kind of the former, and then it was the latter. Because quite some time ago, well, not quite, but like, a month ago or whatever, whenever they made their quarterly call, I had seen what was going on with the quarterly call of Wizards of the Coast, or rather Hasbro. It's the Hasbro quarterly call to its investors. And I thought that was kind of newsworthy, but I guess I was doing a lot of videos in the last month, and other things got in the way, so I didn't get around to it. But now I saw something else that reminded me of the earlier news about the quarterly call. And I think the two things, you're going to see what I mean, are intimately interconnected. So the basic thing you have to know in the context of what I'm going to be telling you about is that Hasbro is not doing well, right? Hasbro, over the last 5 years, I think it is, has lost half of their stock value. They used to be over $100. Now they're just over $50 or something like that. 53, I think, is last time I checked. So if a company in just a few years loses half of its value, there is a problem. Something's very, very wrong there. And actually, I would go as far as to say that when your company, Hasbro, depends on Wizards of the Coast to keep you afloat, right? Like when that's your biggest earner, when that's the best thing you've got going for you, you're in a lot of trouble, right? Because there's no way that should be right. It just doesn't make any sense. The company like Hasbro, multinational company, billions and billions of dollars of value, that they would need to rely on a company that only makes two products, really, like collectible card games and RPGs, both of which are niche hobbies. Collectible card games is a bigger niche hobby, but it's still a niche hobby. That's not what Hasbro should be needing to survive. Hasbro is a toy company, except here's the problem. This is the core of the analysis right here, which is that Hasbro is a toy company for kids that no longer likes kids or wants to make toys. And that's a huge problem for them, right? Because the millennials who've taken over Hasbro have decided that that's not interesting. It's not cool. It's not socially relevant. Why would we want to do stuff like that? What we want to do is produce other stuff that is going to be for an adult audience, basically, And this is an appealing thing in one sense, both because these delusions of grandeur that people might have of say, well, we don't want to just be making, building blocks for little babies. We want to be making art. We want to be making something relevant. That's part of what is the motivation. But also the motivation is that it's something that looks like it can work at a certain stage in the process. So it's a trap. It's an economic trap that happens. And I could give you an example of where this happened in an absolutely enormous major way, and that was with comic books. Now, if you're an early to mid Gen Xer, like myself, I'm more on the mid side, getting closer towards the late side of Gen X. But you will remember this. Other people younger than this will not, because the change happened during the course of my childhood, basically. So when I was a very young kid, comic books were made for me. They were made for kids. And this is so we're talking about back in the 1970s and the very early 80s. Comic books were primarily a delivery system of stories for children. Now, that didn't mean they couldn't be interesting, that they couldn't be fun, and that adults didn't sometimes read them too. All of those things were true, right? But primarily, the audience was understood by the people that made them. DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Archie Comics, etc. Those people understood that this was a product for children, right? So they were priced at a price a child could afford with his allowance, right? There was a time, believe it or not, when I bought a comic book for 10 cents, I think it was at the earliest I can remember, maybe not, maybe it was 40 cents. I don't know. But it was like way under $1, right? Or 25, I don't know. But like a new comic book would cost you. So you could pay for it, right? You'd be able to afford it, even when you adjust for inflation, right? That you would be able to buy a comic book. And if you were a 7-year-old, and that's kind of the audience. It's the kids who are, they got, even before reading, I guess, because their parents can read to them. But the ones that would buy, the main buying audience would be kids from the age where they start to read until puberty, And so these books the comic books were also not hidden somewhere. They were in every convenience store, in every supermarket. There was a comic book rack, right, in the newsstand. This is how they delivered it to people. And there were some comics that were hailed, as particularly special comics that had a little more depth than what was, than other comics. And there was a range of this, right? Because there were some like comic books that were still basically for kids, but that were somewhat slightly more serious or slightly better written, just because there was more of a focus on them, the X-Men at certain points and things like that. And then there were other comics that were very clearly just the ones that you put somebody on it to churn out stuff, But at some point, something happened, right? And what happened was that a bunch of the people who had grown up, these boomers who had grown up with comic books, they decided that what they wanted wasn't for comic books to be made for kids. They wanted the comic books to be sophisticated, And so they started, we're talking about guys like Alan Moore, right? And I mean, I love Alan Moore's comics, right? And Watchmen is a masterpiece, but in a way it destroyed comics. Right? And what happened was that after that, there was this, and there were a couple of things before Watchmen too, right? Like Swamp Thing, right? Which Alan Moore was also involved in. But anyways, this idea that comics could be super serious and totally adult and should deal with adult themes, and you shouldn't, write them in any way for kids, that began to permeate. And at exactly the same time, comic book stores and stuff like that were popping up in a big way. And the executives at places like DC and Marvel realized, oh, look, we can just sell directly to these people, right? Which included some kids, but it was also a large part of the audience had become people who had read comics as kids and chose not to give it up and were reading them as adults, right? So suddenly that was more appealing because those people have more disposable income. And so it would look like, oh, we're going to make more money. And so eventually they stopped making comics for the rack at the convenience store. You wouldn't be able to get it at the 7-Eleven anymore. Now instead, if you wanted to buy comics, you had to go to a specialty store, right? A comic book store, or you had to order them in some other way. Yeah. And so, and the prices immediately started to advance because they realized, because these are adults, we can charge them more, right? And they obviously they had the excuse of better quality paper and things like that, right? But essentially, that locked in an audience of these young adult and adult nerds, but it killed the kid market. And the thing that comics were meant to be for was kids. And in fact, losing the entire kid market was a bigger problem than the solution that you got from the adults, probably almost from the beginning, right? But worse, over time, that adult audience started to reduce, because the more sophisticated you tried to become, and the more you had to complexify things, the more and more that it would only go to the most extreme of nerds that would continue to read comics, and more regular people would rarely do so. So all of this basically helped kill the comic industry. Hasbro, at the same time, was, or now rather, is in the same fashion, and that's what I meant to say, is now deciding that what they want to do is like collectible stuff for overgrown adults. They want to do specialty games. They want to do memorabilia toys, but they don't actually want to make stuff for kids or for families, right? But they want to make stuff for aging millennials that have no children, although they might call their dog their baby. And this is killing them. And one of the few areas where they're making some money where they were making some money up until recently, was WotC. But here is the other story, not the other part of the story quite yet, but this is the other side of this part of the story, which is that Wizards of the Coast is also doing badly now. And in this last phone call, in this last quarterly report, Hasbro, in a way, I don't know if it was Hasbro that was covering it up for the stockholders, or if it was Wizards that was covering it up for Hasbro and the stockholders. But there's always spin in these things, right? You never want to do a quarterly report where you say, well, you know what? We crapped everything up. We're completely screwed, right? You don't want to say that. So you always try to find a way to put a spin to suggest, oh, no, we're doing good. We're doing really great now, and you guys should all be happy about this. This is as good as it can get, right? And that's basically what happened here. But what happened that was very interesting is that Wizards, it made it look like they've had a banner year, right? Like they've had a really, really good sales. And so this seemed to, at first glance, it seems to kind of reinforce that Hasbro's doing is okay, right? But actually what happened is that very clearly Dungeons and Dragons is not doing well. And in fact, Magic isn't doing particularly well either. There is one thing that ended up doing really well, though, and that's Baldur's Gate 3. Now, the trick that they used is that they said, well, Baldur's Gate 3 is D&D, so we're just going to shift in all of these, because they didn't even make they had nothing to do with Baldur's Gate 3, right? Wizards of the Coast was not the creators. It was this other company that licensed the D&D trademark or what have you to do Baldur's Gate 3. And if they'd had anything to do with it, it would be as disastrous as the VTT looks like it's going to turn out to be. But this company was licensed by WotC. Therefore, the part of the profits that go to Hasbro go through WotC and are qualified as D&D profits. So I don't know how many hundreds of millions it was. I haven't double checked again. But it was a lot of money. It was way more money than what they were doing from D&D itself, right? From the RPG product or anything else, because the movie was a flop too, right? So, but they lumped that in. They said, this is all of our D&D profits. Look at that. We're doing spectacularly well. And so this is to maintain the illusion that their ruinous policies, that everything that these people like Kyle Brinks, like Cynthia Williams are doing is somehow strokes of genius, when actually this is like, a sinking ship, and you're showing how you've bailed out a couple of pots of water for the moment, right? Because the Baldur's Gate money, I mean, that's great, but that's not a permanent solution. That's not something that's going to be enduring for them. It's also not relevant to what they do, right? Like somebody intelligent who looks at these numbers, if somebody would bother to stop and check this out, they would go, well, you know what? I can see that some of this is from this video game, and that most of it is from this video game, and only a little bit of it is from these book sales that are actually pretty abysmal. So why are we allowing you to continue doing this? Why don't we just focus on doing more Baldur's Gate 3s, or something like that? And that's what these guys are doing. So, order me a dozen Baldur's Gate 3s, please. That would be the end of it. That would be the end of D&D as a written product. But they're trying to put this illusion that they are being successful. And actually what was successful is this group of nerds that spent 6 years making BG3, right? And in fact, that is an important number because you have to kind of divide the profit by the amount of time that it took for this to develop. Though that's more true for the company that made Baldur's Gate and not for Wizards, because Wizards, as far as they were concerned, this was a question of zero effort on their part, as far as I know. I might be wrong about that. If I am, correct me, but I'm pretty sure they had no active part in the creation of this product, which is why it turned out good. So, but they're using it to justify all the terrible decisions, the awful decisions they've made about D&D, the game, because they've lumped it all in together in one big massive profit. This is like if your friend makes $100 selling lemonade and you make $1, and then you go over there and go, look at this, jointly we've made $101 selling lemonade. Like this is the oldest trick in the book, And so the question is, well, why? Why do they keep failing? And it's because they're just not willing to turn around on any of their abysmal ideas. And this is where I get to this last thing that was drawn to my attention a couple of days ago. One of you guys, one of my viewers, showed me the link to this to a video that was kind of very analytical. And it was very much it was a lefty video, right? So it was praising all this shit, but it was nevertheless, he went into great specific details of this. So thank you to whoever that was. I'm sorry that I forget what your username was, but I appreciate you sending that. Because I took a look at it and I said, oh yeah, okay, well, that makes sense. So you know how like recently the woke communists have been, going to classic books like Roald Dahl, but especially kids' books. They had Roald Dahl and Dr. Seuss and stuff like that, Willy Wonka, and have been changing words, right? Just as if like they're just erasing the past and creating and using the new language present in the now woke books, by just erasure of prior language without telling anyone, Well, guess what? Wizards of the Coast has been doing the same thing. They've gone and to the original D&D 5th edition books, they have been selectively revising, and they've apparently done a new wave of revisions of removing certain words. And this is if you had a new edition, right, or a new print run, you could say, well, this print run has corrected several points of errata and altered language here and here and here, right? But if you don't do that, it's like you're essentially trying to retroactively fool someone it's a disrespect to the designers, to the people who wrote it, who put down the language for it, which I'll note, I didn't actually write any single block of text per se, so I'm not talking about myself, but it's because a lot of this, none of this is about rules in this particular case. What it is about descriptions of things. So, for example, places where they talk about where you have the descriptor of savage, right? So like the Knoll bands are led by a particularly savage leader or something like that, And so they've erased savage, and then suddenly they replace it, they cut it out, and they paste in its place something like aggressive or particularly violent, right? But not the word savage, right? And apparently they've done hundreds of these, right? So if you've now have and I guess in like the virtual tabletop or in like whatever Roll20 or whatever it is that D&D uses right now, D&D Beyond, right? In that, you have these books in digital format. I'm assuming that they're changing the language of these books as we speak, right? And that when you open them, you're going to find that the words are not the same as they used to be, except, in most cases they're trying to do it in such a way that you won't even notice, right? So there's several words that they've removed, which included like savage, horde, what other ones? Like bloodthirsty, I think. Anything that obviously anything that they want to try to do, anything that describes the idea that some civilizations might be more bloodthirsty than others, or that some cultures might be more bloodthirsty than others, or that some societies might be at a more primitive stage of development than others. That you can't allow that, right? No, everything has to be space Wakanda, or else you're a bad person, And so like I'm wondering, because also apparently in some places, and it's very clear, like they did promise they were going to have 3 diversity readers for every single word in the D&D manual, right? And clearly there are some parts that are being done by some people and some that are being done by others, because in some places they take certain words out and replace them, and in other places they don't. So like the word barbarian, and here comes the next big fight, because barbarian is an actual class, right, in D&D. And you're in some places they've taken out the word barbarian or barbarians, not as the class descriptor yet, but as a descriptor of a group of 2D4 I don't know, a group of 2D4 Knowlish barbarians will be guarding the path, or something like that. And they've replaced that with something. But in other places, they haven't replaced it. In some places, I think they've replaced savage with barbarian. So there's also no, like as typical with any Soviet-style system, the whole thing is inept, corrupt, and ridiculous, But this is the stuff that they really care about. They're really dedicated to doing this, to hiring enormous amounts of people, spending huge amounts of money on those people in order to make sure that they erase history and insult everybody who had no problem with the original game. And that's their real goal. Making money is not an important goal to these people, clearly. Covering up the fact that they're not making money apparently is, because they did at least some effort there with that, with how they presented their profits in that quarter. But it's a bit funny. If they could put half the effort they put into like trying to correct language into actually making products, then they might actually not need Baldur's Gate 3. Who knows? Anyway, so that's basically the story I wanted to tell you, and this all paints to the fact that there's going to be continued decline. Now, again, I don't know what'll happen if there's if they're planning to do some kind of big switch over and a return to tradition, so to say, with when they try to go over completely to the VTT. Because I can't imagine, I don't know. Maybe I don't play a lot of video games. Right, but it seems clear to me that one of the things that was appealing to Baldur's Gate 3 was that it was actual D&D adventuring, I'm guessing, right? Am I wrong? And when you do the virtual tabletop, it's not going to, if the virtual tabletop is full of adventures that are about going and working as a barista in a cafe, I don't think people are going to stay for that, right? So obviously, if they're going to do the VTT, they've got to go back to breaking down the door dungeon crawl type stuff, or wilderness combat, or mass combat or something, right? But it's going to be for the video game nerds, right? Either that or they really haven't thought any of this through and it's going to be a complete disaster, right? If they have the same people, if they have Mackenzie DeArmas making adventures for the VTT, what the hell is that going to look like, right? Here you can put add-ons to the autistic Medusa lesbian love nest, what is that? What's that going to be? So I just can't imagine. I have to think that they're going to have to scale back from all the wokest, oh my God, so random nonsense in order to, because what they're playing with is a world constructor, right? They've got to make it something that's going to be more conventional. But they haven't yet, and they're certainly not showing any sign of it yet. So I don't know. I might be completely wrong. And if that's the case, the VTT, I think, will be an unmitigated disaster. So I just can't wait to see whether, which way they go. It's going to be very funny. Anyways, I guess that's everything for today. Be sure to check out, if you've already got Sword and Caravan, check out Wilderlands. I mean, Wilderlands is a guide for random encounters outside the off-road on the Silk Road, plus some other details for like creating character clans for characters that are from the Silk Road, and there's Eastern dragons in there. But it's not really a system neutral book or a setting neutral book. You need to have Sword and Caravan for that one. But check out also Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road. That's different. That one you can use in just about anything where you want to have some interesting NPCs to add on. But it also has an expanded timeline of the Sword and Caravan campaign and the Assassin class for Lion and Dragon. That's out already. RPG Pundit Presents number 109, Medieval Dream Magic, is out on the Spectre Press site on drive-thru. Be sure to check out a complete system of the magic of dreams. Similar but somewhat different to the one in the Invisible College. But if you've got the Invisible College, you know there's dream magic in there too. And check out the Old School Companion 2. 25 adventures, none of which involve cafes, none of which involve you being a barista, that are all based on medieval authentic sources. And you can use them in any OSR game, really. Of course, they're especially good for Lion and Dragon, but they're usable just about everywhere. And I guarantee you that a lot of these adventures are going to be very different from anything that you're used to, but they're not going to be lame. So check that out. And again, thank you to everyone. Share the video anywhere you can. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. I'm posting a lot of nice pictures in the community section of Meatball. And you don't want to miss Meatball. I've been recently doing pictures of her being on Banana Patrol. You'll want to see that. So that's everything for today. Currently smoking. This is a Lorenzetti oversized Hawkbill plus Argento Natural.